Hello, my name is Oscar Neerstrass. Today I'd like to show you how to get started with the Glamorous Toolkit. The Glamorous Toolkit is a moldable development environment, which means that it can be easily and cheaply adapted to a variety of needs. However, as in the parable of the blind man and the elephant, if you look too closely at one part, you may miss the big picture. Let's take a tour of the various parts that make up GT. First, download Glamorous Toolkit for your platform and fire it up. GT consists of an image populated with live objects. When you open GT, you see at the left a list of tools that you can use to interact with these objects. At the top right, there's also a quick access menu. And there is a button to save the current state of the image if you need to. At the center, there are one or more home cards to quickly access a given project, in this case, the GT book. Now let's explore some of the classical use cases for GT. An important use case for GT is as a knowledge base for system documentation. The GT book is a Lepeter database of linked notebook pages providing detailed documentation about GT. You can start exploring GT by browsing the book. Each page consists of snippets of markdown text, executable code, live examples, or other kinds of content. This page contains a live tree map with an overview of the organization of the book itself. A playground is a Lepeter page of Pharo code snippets. We can enter code like 3 plus 4 and inspect the result. This opens an inspector offering various views of the result. We can add a new code snippet by clicking on the plus, or we can just type command return in the existing snippet. If we inspect the string hello and go to the items view, we can inspect each individual character. The inspector can always be used like this to explore arbitrary nested objects. A note is just like a playground, except that it starts with a text snippet and should be given a name. As before, we can add new snippets with the plus button or using keyboard shortcuts. We can move snippets around with the menu at the bottom right or with shortcuts. All your notes and playgrounds are automatically stored in your personal Lepeter database. I use my Lepeter database to track projects, tasks, frequently asked questions, and random notes. You can have multiple databases and move pages between them. A page is a live object which you can inspect. A Lepeter page has many views, such as the snippets view, or store string, which will programmatically generate a copy of the page. Lepeter pages are saved to the file system. We can also interact with the page by sending it messages. Here we can inspect the Lepeter database of this page. GT can also be seen as a new kind of integrated development environment. With the coder, you can create classes, add methods, categorize them, or turn them into class methods, run code directly from the browser, create example methods, run examples as tests, search for methods, and search for classes. You can version your code in a Git repository. There are detailed instructions in the GT book on how to work with GitHub. An important use case for GT is as a tool for modeling and exploring arbitrary kinds of data. The approach is always the same. Wrap the data as domain objects, and then add custom views and actions to answer questions about the data and enable exploration of the domain model. A good example in the GT book to start with is the GitHub REST API case study. You can start by downloading the JSON data of an organization on GitHub using standard tools, parse the data, and wrap it as an explorable domain object. By adding custom views, we obtain an explorable model of the Fink GitHub organization that shows us all its repositories, and for each repo, the events and contributors. These views are cheap to create, typically with a few lines of boilerplate code. GT is also a language workbench supporting the modeling, analysis, and execution of multiple languages. GT can parse numerous languages out of the box using SMAC, the Smalltalk compiler. GT can be readily extended to support other languages. Here is a dedicated snippet for querying GitHub using the GraphQL query language. While SMAC can generate parsers from complex grammar specifications, for small tasks it can be easier to start with Petit Parser, a framework for building composable parsers. Here is a tiny parser to recognize and compute arithmetic sums. The GT book offers a tutorial and an in-depth case study showing how to build an interpreter for a small language using Petit Parser. While all of these perspectives are valid, they miss the big picture. GT is really an environment to support moldable development. The key idea is that you should be able to adapt the development tools to your domain to make it easier to understand and explain the system by exposing what is interesting. How can you get started with moldable development? Regardless of the specific use case, moldable development implies programming. And when it comes to GT, this programming happens in Pharo, so first you should develop some skills in programming with Pharo and GT. There are numerous pages in the GT book to help you get started with this. Then, when you are programming, try to focus on live objects rather than code. Instead of using the coder to program, get used to working directly in the inspector. Here we are inspecting a live instance of this slideshow instead of looking at the code that generates it. We can always navigate to the code when we need to, but it is harder to navigate from the code to the instances. Next, learn how to adapt the tools by adding custom domain-specific extensions. Custom views, actions, and searches are all examples of simple adaptations written as short methods for your domain objects. Finally, learn to use notebooks to document your questions and understanding using both code snippets and live example methods. A good case study to start with is the squarified tree map algorithm. See how the notebook page explains the algorithm using live embedded examples and domain-specific views. You'll find more GT in 7-minute videos on our YouTube channel, or you can explore GT by downloading it from gtoolkit.com. Thanks for listening.